Hey guys, in this week's Casually Criterion episode, we are going to review Moonage Daydream, spine number 1192. But before that, we're going to talk about our series wrap-up conversations of Three Body Problem and Fallout. It's all time-stamped, so skip around and join us!
And welcome to the Casual Cinecast, powered by Cinelinks, the show where we talk about the TV and movies we've been watching, as well as do a deep dive review of a current movie or a classic film from the Criterion Collection as voted on by the listener via X/Twitter. This is one of those Criterion episodes, which we like to call Casually Criterion episodes. The film that won our last listener poll was Moonage Daydream, spine number 1192. My name is Justin, and with me as always is a man who knows, without a shadow of a doubt, for a fact, that Major Tom is a junkie. Mike, how are you?
Good. He admitted it as much. He admitted as much. So
yeah, you and Major Tom go way back, from what I recall.
Yeah,
He confides in you.
He does. I don't even know how to respond to that, but
yeah, I don't know if it's a good one. But I thought of it right before we started recording, so
well, it certainly threw me for a loop.
That was the plan.
Yeah. But anyway, how are you, sir?
Man, I'm good. I spent the last week, which is why we didn't do an episode last week, in Vegas for the first time. I was there for a work conference.
Well, that's kind of cool, I guess. Not cool that it has to be for work, but cool that you got to go.
Yeah, I mean, had to work during the day. Couple of things that took place in the evening, but otherwise my evenings were pretty much free for gallivanting about Vegas and doing the casino thing if I so choose. I more so chose to do the eat cool food and go to a buffet thing.
Okay,
that's my preference to gambling personally.
Yeah. Did you do anything else cool? Any Vegas-esque things? I
did see Blue Man Group my last night there.
That's very Vegas,
which is incredibly Vegas, and was cool. I enjoyed it. It was somewhat hard to take seriously, being such a Arrested Development fan and having seen that show so many times. It's absolutely impossible to separate them from the sort of joke that they are used for in the show. So, and then the other thing on like a sour note is that the first day there, my luggage got stolen and I lost all my clothes and toiletries that I went there with. So I had to buy a whole new wardrobe and luggage on the first night.
That sounds horrible.
It was terrible. I mean, luckily, like, it was just clothes and toiletries, so nothing expensive. I had all my like electronics and, books that I was in the middle of and my laptops and stuff all in a backpack that I kept on me. But the luggage was stolen from the Bell checkout desk where you can store your luggage. If you get like to a hotel early and you can't check in by a certain time, you can leave your luggage with them. It got stolen from there.
Bummer. So, you going to put the name of the establishment on blast here?
I'm not, because I don't think it was their fault. It was 20% my fault for losing the tag that they gave me to pick up my luggage, and 80% the person's fault who got it for not just turning it in as a lost ticket and instead choosing to pick up my bag with that tag and take off.
Steal it? Proceed to steal it?
Yeah. I will say it's a blonde woman, so if anyone knows a blonde woman who is bragging about getting a free luggage in Vegas last weekend, let me know.
Yeah, please.
Yeah.
Well, that's a huge bummer, but I'm glad you had fun anyway.
Yeah, the rest of the time, it was great. Sour start, but then it was all uphill from there.
Good. Awesome. Well, we have a lot to talk about. Should we go ahead and get into the main event?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go.
All right, here we go. Well, I guess it's not the main event, but the beginning of the main event.
Yeah.
News on the march. Here we go, starting now.
News on the march.
All right, Justin, thanks for joining me in News on the March. First up, we're going to be talking about Season 1 of Fallout. It's all out on Amazon right now. Everyone kind of binged watched it. If you haven't, like I said at the top of the show, everything's time-stamped in the show notes, so skip around to whatever you've seen.
Yeah, that's right. And I guess we could say that because these are our sort of wrap-ups on Season 1 for both this and our next topic, Three Body Problem, there could be spoilers. I think we are going to go ahead and give a warning, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So that was it. That was your warning.
That's it. Okay.
It'll probably be in the show notes as well. But hey, there you go. You've been warned adequately all over the place.
Yeah.
So spoilers for Season 1 of Fallout will begin shortly. Okay. So Justin, I'm going to throw it to you here because you just finished this last night.
This is true.
And I am curious to see what you think. So why don't you kick us off with your thoughts on Season 1 of Fallout?
Yeah, so I think it's a show that took me a bit to get rolling, but once I did, especially once I decided that I needed to finish this finish the season by the time we recorded this episode, it became, I guess, better and better every episode to me. Like I don't look back on it and see like one episode was really strong and another episode was like kind of okay. To me, it felt like a continuous momentum building.
Yeah,
which was very cool because it became easier and easier to get through. And I say all that to say that I did really enjoy the season overall. I can't remember how much we got into it when we talked about it before. I think we'd each seen 1, maybe 2 episodes.
I had seen 2 and you had seen 1.
Okay. So I think there was an element of the show. I can't remember if I mentioned it, but early on in Season 1, I was kind of struggling with the Brotherhood, the Knights, Brotherhood of the Steel. I can't, if that's what they're called. That whole segment and the Knight storyline, and was like struggling to get into it. And I think by the time the show ends, or not the season ends, I was kind of over that complaint. And I say that to say that I don't really have many complaints about the show other than I don't know that some things are as surprising as maybe the show wanted them to be. Because I feel like some of it you could see coming from miles away. And I think sometimes that happens when you have a more important character that's going to do something big and important, and they've cast a more notable actor in it, you know?
Oh yeah, sure.
So like stuff with Kyle MacLachlan wasn't really surprising. I picked up on that pretty early, especially there was an episode where his character, when he's younger, before the bombs, calls Walton Goggins at home. And he's like, "It's Henry." And I'm like, "Oh, okay. So that's her dad." You know? So some things weren't as surprising, but it was still cool. It was still a cool story overall. And I like the world. I like the tone that the show has a lot. It leans more grim with touches of humor versus a show that we've compared it to before, I guess, because it's a video game adaptation. Twisted Metal 2 didn't necessarily have enough grim for me, or as I'd hoped for. It was all a little too silly for me.
Did you just call the show Twisted Metal 2?
It's possible because that's the main game that I played. I never played the first Twisted Metal.
I think you did, but I don't know.
Whoops. If I did, whoops.
No worries. But yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah.
Go on.
But anyways, I think the performances in this are really good. Walton Goggins is pretty great as always. I don't think that's groundbreaking opinion. Ella Purnell is really great. I enjoyed a lot of the little cameos we got, seeing Chris Parnell show up and Fred Armisen in the second to last episode.
Oh, yeah.
Little cameos like that made me laugh. All in all, I had a great time with the show, and I say that coming from a background of having played none of the games.
Right.
So I knew none of the lore, so this was all new world building and a whole world that I knew nothing about. So So yeah, I think it works well on its own. I don't think, in my opinion, it doesn't seem like it rests too much on needing to play the video game, if anybody's curious about that. But good stuff. What do you think, having seen it all now?
Yeah, so I am going to echo a lot of what you are saying. This show surprised me, I think, with how good it was. I have played 3 Fallout games, but I've seen a lot of really bland, boring streaming shows in my day. To the point to where it's like streaming shows, it's like, sometimes you can get something really good, and then sometimes you get just like hot garbage, Jonathan Nolan was behind this, so, I was somewhat hopeful. He's had his hand in a lot of really successful, good stuff. But also, he was last running Westworld, and Westworld near the end was kind of a mixed bag. I liked it a lot still because it had really cool sci-fi ideas. Mm-hmm. But I think the general public kind of fell off that show because I think the sci-fi ideas were a little too sci-fi, and not quite accessible. So I was kind of on the fence about the Fallout show. I wasn't really sure how it was going to be. I was never really looking forward to it. Didn't hear a lot about it when it was in production. And then it came out, and I really enjoyed it. I think it captures the spirit of the games, which is dark, like you said. It's very violent and gory. It's also satirical in a lot of ways, and funny, and darkly funny in a lot of other ways. It's a balancing act, right? Those games are a balancing act to keep all those tones in the air at once and keep juggling all that. And I think the show does a really good job of capturing that. In a way that I think feels like Fallout. Like watching the show feels like playing the game in a lot of ways. So I think that's really cool that they were able to capture that.
Yeah. It has made me tempted to go play the games, which I think it has a lot. I think I saw something, a headline or something about how Fallout has huge numbers of players joining the games and stuff since the show came out.
Yeah, I've seen that too. And Fallout 4, I just downloaded on my PlayStation 5 because there's a next-gen patch coming out for it because that was a PS4 game, and now we're on PS5. So Bethesda is finally releasing a patch to upgrade the frames per second and a few other things. So, yeah, I'll be playing Fallout 4 soon. Nice. Because I was inspired by this show. So, all's to say, I think the show is a lot of fun. Like you, I wouldn't say I was super surprised by plot twists, but I don't think that bothered me because it felt right dramatically. It didn't feel like it was a misstep or boring because I could see it coming or I predicted it or had a feeling or a hunch or something.
Yeah,
there were other things that surprised me as someone who's played the games. And here's where I think I will get a little bit into spoilers. The last episode in particular, I think, was quite good. The flashbacks and the world building they do and conversations between the heads of these big corporations before the bombs went off, where they're talking about the vaults and all that stuff. It was really cool. As someone who's played the games, a lot of what you do in the games is like stumble upon vaults and everything has gone crazy. Like you're seeing the aftermath of something going horribly wrong. And you have to kind of piece together like what happened in this vault to make things go crazy. And you realize that a lot of the vaults are subject to crazy experiments, and you don't know why. The vault dwellers who lived in those vaults certainly didn't know why a lot of times. Like there's one vault where there's like, I think, 999 women and then like one man. There's one vault where like, I think they keep a bunch of drug addicts in there, and then there's like a locked room that has like a shitload of drugs in it. And if they find access to that room, you're gonna see what they do. Just like weird psychological inhumane experiments, and you always wonder to yourself, why? other than my entertainment, why did this happen? And it's cool to see the show kind of plant those seeds a little bit.
Yeah. So that element of it, that was a question I had, was that's not something that is a story element in the game. That's just an explanation that the show is offering up to stuff from the game.
It depends. I haven't played all the games. I haven't played 1 or 2. I haven't even finished New Vegas, which everyone says is like the best one. But what I would say is a lot of those people in that room, some of them are in the games to varying degrees. Like the guy with the mustache, I think he's in New Vegas to a degree, but like in ways that I won't spoil. Like kind of in New Vegas, I should say. So a lot of those lore things existed, and there may be reasons as to why there were weird, crazy experiments going on in many of the vaults, and then some of them none at all. I don't know what the story lore reason is, but it's cool that the show is showing me parts that like I haven't seen from the games.
Yeah.
There's so like, I'm not even the biggest Fallout fan, right? I should preface this by saying like there's a lot I don't know about the lore and the reasons why and things, because I joined in Fallout 3.
Mm-hmm. Well, compared to me, you're an expert.
That's true.
Yeah, I do like a lot of the stuff that we touch on in the final episodes. The idea of capitalizing on war, right? And it's not necessarily a new idea, but
well, what I think's new about it, is kind of what Jonathan Nolan said about it. Like Fallout is what you get whenever you outsource human survival,
right?
Like when capitalism meets human survival. I think this is like an interesting satire in a way, exploring that idea in a way that like I haven't quite seen done before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I think it does feel fresh, and in some ways it makes the flashbacks more interesting. You know, I definitely went through periods of the show where when we're in a section that I'm not as interested in, I'm kind of, constantly wishing that we would go back to the story I was more interested in.
Right.
And a lot of the time that happened to be stuff with Lucy or her brother back in their home vault. Was a lot of the time I wish we were back there, even over a lot of
you want to follow them. Yeah, they are the most interesting character. Oh, I think the ghoul, Lucy, and her brother are the best.
The ghoul gets more interesting as the show goes along.
Yeah.
But then also at the same time, that primarily gets more interesting in terms of what we're seeing in the flashbacks and what develops there. So there were times in the last couple episodes where I wanted to spend more time in the flashbacks.
Yeah.
And less time in the other stuff. So it's interesting how it goes through those periods. I'm not sure that that's necessarily a fault or a good thing either. It's just what happened for me. Those flashbacks got really intriguing on that front thematically, and the moral tales, I guess, that they're trying to get at.
Sure. And I think what's interesting, like if you have seen Westworld at all, you'll know that Jonathan Nolan does like to play with different timelines, like events happening in different timelines. So once I realized that the flashbacks were going to be an ongoing thing, like there's parallel stories going on, and then one's going to inform the other whenever it sheds more light on something, right? Once I realized that was the formula we were going with, I was able to let myself get invested into those flashbacks, because now I know it's going to answer a lot of questions and give reasons why and things like that. Whereas before, for the first couple of episodes, it seemed like the flashbacks to me were sort of trying to give us more context for the ghoul. And I think it is doing that, but it's also fleshing out things and telling a story, with Cooper Howard's wife and the company she works for and so on. So yeah, I would say I'm pretty interested in both storylines.
Yeah. Now at this point, I think I'd be interested in whatever they throw at us, and depending on any new introductions in a season 2, which I think it has been renewed officially, right?
Yeah, I don't know that it's been renewed, but I would say like almost certainly at this point. The show's a hit.
Yeah, there are people I know that don't necessarily watch a lot of TV that are watching it.
Yeah.
So,
And I think this is the show off of Amazon that I've heard the most buzz about since The Boys.
mm-hmm.
So
I agree.
My only hope is that they can continue this momentum and what keeps season 1 good. I don't know. It was a solid season. It's not great. It's not like the greatest show ever.
Sure.
But it's a solid show, right? It's a solid, entertaining show, and with a bar that's like pretty high now, So
yeah, I don't see any reason that this can't, be up there in terms of quality with like the first couple seasons of Westworld, or I think it has the momentum to achieve that sort of standard in terms of like quality and having things to say and interesting ideas. Even if I guess I don't know if you'd call this sci-fi, kind of.
Yeah, I would say like
there's some technology sort of.
Yeah, sci-fi, action comedy. I don't know, less comedy. I don't know. I don't even know what the balance is, but that's why Fallout's always been such a unique IP. Every time the games come out, it's always pretty exciting. They don't happen every day. They come out every few years.
Yeah,
like I think Fallout 4 came out like 7 years ago.
Mm-hmm. That was the last game.
Well, they have an online one, Fallout 76, but I don't really play online games.
Oh, right. I think that's probably where a lot of the players, like the player base climbing after the show was probably that, I guess.
Yeah,
but,
probably so.
I don't play much online games either. Only if I'm really good at the game will I venture online.
Yeah, like I can see you playing a lot of card games online.
Those are the ones that I play.
Yep.
Yeah. That and FIFA, but that's a story for another time.
Indeed.
Not this podcast for sure.
For sure.
I will say I thought it was pretty brutal and surprising in the last episode where Lucy finds out her mom's still alive and she's, I guess, basically a ghoul, an invalid.
Like a really old, not taken care of ghoul.
Yeah. Which I don't understand exactly. Why no one would take care of her, because it seemed like what's her name, Moldover.
Well, okay, so my assumption is that, like, you know how the ghoul said that if he doesn't get his little chemo drugs or whatever they are, pretty regularly, he'll become feral. What they call the ghouls that act like zombies are feral ghouls in the game.
Right.
And I believe someone in the show asks if he's feral. So he will become a feral ghoul if he doesn't get medicine. So I guess what happened is she didn't have access to enough medicine and eventually just became feral. And once that happened, they strapped her down.
Is it irreversible?
I guess so.
Do we know?
I don't know that.
Sure.
Yeah. See, like I said, I'm not a Fallout expert. I just kind of, when you stumble upon a ghoul in the game, they're either feral or they talk to you. So,
yeah. And I guess I thought that, and maybe it is, but Lucy, at one point, she drinks like the radiated water, and then they give her medicine.
Yeah,
I was worried that was going to be similar to the medicine that the like Squire kid got that turned him into a ghoul.
Oh, right. Yeah, we don't know what that was. That's actually like a dangling plot thread to be revisited. I have a feeling I think I know what it is, and I'm not sure it's what they assumed it was in the last episode. Whenever they're like, "Hey, I think you're turning into a ghoul," and he's like, "Uh-oh."
Oh, okay.
It might be that, but I think it might be something else.
Sure.
But I don't know. We'll see. I'm sure that snake oil salesman guy will be revisited. He popped up a couple times in this season, so
yeah.
It seems
character.
like they want you to remember him.
Mm-hmm.
But no, they have medicine to get rid of radiation poisoning. Yeah. Kind of like they have stim packs and they have Radaway or Radex.
They called it Radaway in the show.
Okay, yeah. So Radaway that helps get rid of radiation poisoning, and then stim packs like you saw in the first episode, will heal you from really dramatic wounds, like being stabbed by a raider in the stomach.
I like. I'm trying to remember if this is the first show. I feel like I saw it in something else recently where someone uses a stim pack to heal something pretty dramatic. But, you know, because that's what they do in the video game. But I like bringing that into a live action adaptation where like the stim packs actually work that way.
Yeah, I like the like ballsiness to just treat it like a video game world.
Yeah.
To a certain degree. Like, did you just get stabbed through the torso? No big deal.
Yeah. I don't think it was Twisted Metal because I didn't watch enough of that show, but maybe it was like Bad Batch or something. Someone mentioned a stim pack.
I don't know.
Maybe not Bad Batch. That show's a bit too grounded.
But, strangely enough.
Yeah. Oh well. Anyways.
Yeah. Anyways, pretty cool. Some pretty atrocious de-aging in the last episode.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. Thank you. That was the one thing that stuck out. It was quite bad.
Yeah. If you know what 20-something Kyle MacLachlan looks like, then, or even if you don't, I'm sure that de-aging will be pretty disturbing to you.
Yeah. I don't think your knowledge of what Kyle MacLachlan looked like 30 years ago will matter.
No, probably not.
As much as if you know what real people look like. And
how faces look.
Yeah. And you ought to, because you have other shots of real people right next to shots of DH Kyle MacLachlan, and it looks terrible.
Yeah. So hopefully that gets better.
Yeah. Or we just don't go there.
Yeah, or they just don't have him in flashbacks.
That would be ideal. Because, overall, I would say most of the special effects look really good. I can't think of much that really stuck out.
Yeah, the suits look pretty good. Like the big armor suits, like when they move, I believe they're heavy.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like they look good. Like I would say like that sounds really expensive because I don't know, but I imagine they are a blend of practical and then CGI. Much like they do with the Iron Man suits when they're filming Iron Man, right?
Yeah.
Like,
with the ghouls.
And to pull that off in a way that looks good and looks real and that you just kind of buy it and you're not thinking about and like looking for the seams, like I feel like this show succeeds in that level quite a bit. I would say like 90% of the time.
Yeah. I've thought like the creature and the water in that episode where they're at the big lake and they lose the head. I thought that looked pretty good, personally.
Yeah.
No big complaints.
So it looks pretty good. Most of the time the show, I think, is a very good looking show. What I'm curious about, actually, is now that they know this show is a hit and it's going to have an audience, will the budget go up and will we be able to see that on the screen?
Yeah. I don't know where we'd see it. I thought it looked pretty great overall.
Yeah. But, who knows? They're going to a different area of the world, it seems like, in season 2. So maybe different kinds of landscapes. Who knows? But, anything else that you want to mention for Fallout?
No, I don't think so. I think we've touched on all the points that I.
All right, cool. Fun show.
Absolutely. Fun being the operative word. Absolutely. It's quite that.
All right. So with that, it's time to move to our next thing, which is what?
Which is, it's less fun, but still fun in some ways, I'd say. But we're going to talk about Three Body Problem now that, Mike, you have seen all of season 1. And the last time we talked about it, I'd seen all of season 1. Mm-hmm. So this is primarily focused on you, at least to start with. But tell us your thoughts on Three Body now that you've, I think at the time you'd seen one episode. Now you've seen it all. So where are you at?
Yeah. So Three Body Problem. This was a show that I was inherently curious about because I've heard about the books for a long time. I know you've been trying to get me to read them, but I had heard of them even prior to that. Mm-hmm. I was also curious about what the Game of Thrones guys what their next project that they were in charge of was going to be after Game of Thrones, how it was going to look, feel, be received, so on. This was a show that I really enjoyed. It kind of came at a weird time because I was already watching Shogun, then Fallout came out right after that, and then I went on vacation. So it actually took me longer to watch the first season than I thought it was going to after I watched like the first episode, you know? I was like, oh, I'll finish this in no time. Anyway, it took me a little bit longer, but I'm kind of glad it did because, again, broken record here, I hate when shows are all released at once and don't come out week to week.
Yeah.
It's a disservice to the show. The cultural conversation around it is much shorter and brief, and it doesn't get its place in the sun like it deserves. It's just sort of consumed over a weekend and then discarded. And there's a lot going on in each episode of this show, to the point to where I feel like the show's kind of designed to sit on an episode and then wait, I think. Or at least it feels pacing-wise like that's the best thing to do. I would say by the first 2 episodes, I don't know that I was like super into it. By episode 3, that problem went away.
Yeah.
I think I still have some criticisms. They're pretty minor, but I don't know that I loved a lot of the character dynamics when they're talking to each other. Like when their characters are doing things or working or something like that, the show's really good. Like whenever it's Liam Cunningham barking orders at people and telling them to do this and do that and do your research and all this stuff. Like I think the show's really great.
That's the Thomas Wade character, right?
Yes. The guy in charge of the group, like the gray-haired guy.
Yes.
That's Davos Seaworth from Game of Thrones. Anyways, I think that's when the show's great. When it's not so great, it's like whenever you spend 2 episodes with like a sad guy talking about how much he loves this girl. And it's not that that's not interesting or that I just feel like it gets a lot of real estate in 8 episodes.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And what I really want to know more about is like the issue at hand, the most important thing going on.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of like it sucks pacing wise whenever we have to step away from that to like, I don't know, hang out with these like buddies and they just talk about being buddies kind of. And I don't know, to me that's less interesting than like when they're actually doing stuff or like when we're exploring the past with I forget her name.
UNG.
Yeah. Or like the cult leader, you know what I mean? Jonathan Pryce. Like, so I would say very high highs and not low lows, but I would say mids. Highs and then some mids. But overall, I can't wait for season 2. You know, like I hope it's like a year and not like 2 years like some shows take.
Yeah. Me too.
So that's kind of where I'm at. Very good. I hear a little bit about the show, but I don't hear enough about it, I don't think. And I don't know if that's people not giving it a chance because it's a Netflix show, the binge thing, like I said earlier, or they're just not going to watch it because of the Game of Thrones guys.
Yeah.
I don't know, but I wish I was hearing more about it. What do you think about the whole thing?
Well, I'm glad to hear you talk about the character dynamics in that way and say that, they're not as good as the rest of the show, not up to the same level. Because I tend to agree, and it's one of those things that having read the books, it's one of the biggest departures from the books that the show takes is creating more relationships between characters. And I think I talked about this before, but they bring the they bring characters from books 2 and 3 and introduce them early on here in the show and bring them there from the beginning, whereas they're totally separate characters from the characters who are in book 1, and they don't show up till book 2 or 3, but now they're all friends and they all know each other in the show.
Yeah.
So they're inventing a lot of these relationship dynamics. Not so much inventing the characters, but inventing them existing at the same time as all the events. And to me, I guess it was one of those things I was worried about, being that sort of like book purist, having complaints about that stuff. Mm-hmm. But I'm glad to hear that you have the same ones, or that's at least like the show that the part of the show that felt the weakest to you, because it does feel the weakest to me. Where the show shines, and it's where the book shines, is these sort of big sci-fi ideas and these hard sci-fi concepts, which the show does simplify a lot of the hard sci-fi concepts and stay out of the weeds for the sake of making it accessible, which is the same reason they make the characters all know each other and have friendships and unrequited love and that sort of thing.
Yeah. And that's kind of like, it makes it hard for me to kind of wrap my head around what the story in the books is. So I'm trying to, like, we did warn there was going to be spoilers, but
yeah,
I guess we've even talked about it before, but I still quite don't get it. So which character, like, name a character that was pulled from, like, that is not in book 1, that is in season 1 of the show. Like, what's a character that was pulled forward?
Let me figure out the name while I'm talking here.
Okay.
But,
because
Saul Durand?
Yeah. The wall facer.
The wall facer. The wall facing is a concept that is not introduced until book 2.
Okay, so that character is not in book 1 at all.
Correct.
Okay.
And the same with Will Downing, the character with the unrequited love.
Mm-hmm.
His character is from book 3.
Okay.
And maybe part of book 2, but he does a lot in book 3, I'll say. One of the characters that is maintained is Benedict Wong's character. He maintains at least through book 2. I think he's partially in book 3. But Dashi, the sort of detective that's following all of this.
Okay.
He's around in book 1. Jin Cheng, the sort of like the main scientist, the one who we're really experiencing like the 3-body problem game through and everything.
Uh-huh.
She's a stand-in for the main character. All of these characters are have different names than they do in the book too.
Okay. I imagine a lot less Chinese people in this version.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. I think all of the main characters in all 3 of their books are Chinese nationality. Yi Wenji is a character that stayed the same. As
It'd be
is,
weird if they changed her.
As is Thomas Wade, Liam Cunningham. His character's the same and same name and stuff.
Okay.
But anyways, what did you have follow up?
Well, okay, so all right. For real, spoilers for the 3-body problem here on out. So in the books, I assume what's going to happen is these characters are still going to be in where they need to be in the story later, but they're just going to freeze themselves, or and then time jumps happen, or are they going to try to condense a lot of the plot? I just don't know.
Yeah, I'm hoping the latter, because in the show, and of course in the books too, the Santi, which, if I ever say Trisolarans while we're talking, it's because they're called Trisolarans in the book, but they've changed the name to Santi in the show. Okay. So if I use Trisolarans, it's the same as the Santi. They're not going to show up for like 400 years. So, yeah, in the book, we go to that time. And I hope that they maintain that level of scale in terms of timeline and like how that makes it feel more like humanity's effort and humanity's fight.
Mm-hmm.
If they condense the times down,
seems like a flash in the pan of human history.
Yeah, and one of my biggest complaints is that it already feels a little bit more that way, in the sense that all of these characters that are going to do very important things, or have already done very important things, all come from the same group of friends. Feels a lot smaller.
Yeah. So based on the way the show goes, I guess what they're going to freeze themselves and then just keep waking up and do these things in future time periods is what it seems like. Is that the impression you're getting?
That's what I think they'll do in the show. And there is obviously an element to that in the books, because they're already freezing someone and sending them off, launching them off into space. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So we know that technology's there. Yeah. So I don't know. It's interesting. Like, I'm very curious, how hard they're going to go with the show, because I think where the show shines, I think, is a lot of the ideas. Like, I love the idea that, diving into the fact that sending the Santi fleet at close to light speed is going to take a long time, but sending a particle that can be like the size of a molecule or whatever, it's a lot easier to send that way faster than light speed, so it can show up and they can, monitor and mess with us that way, right? Like the Sophons.
Mm-hmm.
But I love the idea that they don't want us to develop for 400 years, so they send these things to just mess with our scientific results and like halt all our progress. Like, to me, that idea, that's it. That's one of the things you discovered at the very end of book 1. I think that happens in episode 5 of this season.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that idea sort of blew my mind. Of like,
yeah, that's really crazy.
And
it seems easier for them to just send like a crazy virus.
Sure.
And just let us be extinct, but maybe not. I don't know. Maybe they can't send viruses through space on the back of those things. But
they might not know enough about our biology initially.
That's true. One thing that would make me nervous if I was going to freeze myself is if there was little microscopic computers floating around and distorting all our scientific progress. That would be a scary undertaking, knowing that the science might be wrong on freezing yourself. And we just wouldn't know it until you wake up and you failed.
Yeah, or never woke up.
Exactly.
Sure. Yeah, and I think I think you called it out once we were kind of talking on the side about the ideas like the setting off nuclear detonations behind a thing with like a giant parachute.
Oh yeah, like a sail.
A sail, yeah. To try to get it up to light speed is a very cool idea.
It is very cool. It was fun. Like, that's when the show was really on fire, is whenever they sit down and like break down to you like a concept and like how they plan on doing it. Like, me, I like to watch people do things, like work and like go through a process of doing something. Big fan of that. So
yeah,
hopefully there's a lot more of that in the show's future and less pining over your college friend that may or may not love you back.
The guy who pined is off flying through space in some wrong direction.
Yeah, but
so, who knows?
But they could add more pining from other people,
That's true. Yeah, and things like using the nanofiber to destroy the ship, but not the hard drive, was also very cool. That was one of the things I was looking forward to most, being like seeing how they did that and like seeing that come to life from the book.
Yeah, that was wild. Kind of risky though, because it could have destroyed the hard drive.
Yeah, it also could have got smashed.
Yeah, seemed pretty risky, but cool nonetheless.
Yeah, definitely cool. I think if it's sliced very cleanly, it's probably a little bit easier to recover and repair.
Sure.
than if it gets smashed.
Or blown up.
Yeah. But yeah, that nanofiber stuff is very cool. I'm glad that, I think that felt good being someone that they knew. If I remember correctly in the book, there's just a nanofiber, someone doing research on nanofiber, and they get to know them when they need them.
They
to
just
do
recruit
stuff.
them.
Yeah. That felt good because you had her being a lot torn about what her technology was being used for, and her friends being like, "Come on, we need it."
Right.
Kind of helped smooth over some issues that might be there in the books, I guess.
Yeah. That's another thing. Is like, I'm sure. Like, I would like to hear from someone else who read the books and see like what they think. Like, does this make the story more or less compelling to them? The friendship element,
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm not against it. I just don't know that those character dynamics really lived up to the rest of the material. Like what they did with that element once they added it in, I think has room for improvement.
Yeah, it does. And I would say that anybody who's watched it, and yourself included, that if the processes and the ideas and the problems and solutions and that sort of thing is what is intriguing you most about the show, I would definitely encourage reading the books, because the books are highly focused on that, as I've kind of laid out, talking about how these characters aren't in the same timeline and aren't connected. So you mostly get to see them doing their thing with solving the crisis that we face as humanity.
Pretty cool.
And to me, that the books are just full of that sort of stuff, and gets even more into the weeds on the processes and the explanations and whatnot. Like, some of it is even like hard to follow because it gets into the science of things so much.
Right. Yeah.
So I would recommend the books if you like that element of the show.
Sweet. And do they feel like they were translated from Chinese, or does it read like it? Is the translation good enough to where it kind of flows and feels?
It reads well to me. It's just in some ways it feels dry, and I'm not sure if that's a consequence of it being a hard sci-fi and it diving into science as much, or if it's a consequence of translation. It's hard to tell because it fits together.
Right. Okay. So, cool.
Yeah. Season 2, though, if we don't get it, I think the show will be a big bust, because it certainly isn't self-contained.
No, but I bet we get it. It feels like I heard enough about it to where I've seen lesser Netflix shows get season 2. The only thing that would, I think, hold it up from in my eyes is budget.
Yeah.
But also, I don't know. Does this require an insane budget? I don't know.
I think it could, because we've kind of passed the simplest stuff of the story.
Okay. It's getting pretty weird from here on out.
Yeah. Because, I guess like the biggest stuff is we've seen to this point is like the ship being torn apart or sliced apart, and the whole nuclear bomb sort of like relay race sail thing.
Yeah.
Is like some of the biggest stuff, but even bigger stuff than that nuclear chain reaction stuff comes. And it involves space and ships in space and stuff. And I'm just like, that sounds expensive to me.
Yeah, I bet. Okay.
So we'll see.
Cool. Yeah. Anything else you want to talk about before we get to the main event? No,
I could probably go on all day about it. But it's probably good to cut it off and
all right,
and stop.
All right. Well, here we go. Our casually Criterion review for Moonage Daydream starts now.
This is ground control to Major Tom. You've really made the grade, and the papers want to know whose shirt you wear.
Ever since I was 16, I was determined we'd have the greatest adventure that only one person could ever have.
alligator.
I'm a mama, papa calling for you. I'm the space invader. I'll be a rock and roller bitch for you.
And how about the shoes? Are those men's shoes or women's shoes or bisexual shoes?
They're shoes, silly.
All right, so as always with our Criterion films, we will not be doing our usual general spoiler-free section that we do up front when we review our newer films. The Criterion films have typically been out for years, if not decades, so we're going to jump straight into talking about them, spoilers and all. So consider this your spoiler warning, if there really can be one for
this movie.
Moonage
I don't
Daydream.
know that it matters.
I don't think it does, unless you just know nothing about David Bowie and want to be completely surprised by the journey that his music and persona took throughout his career. If you don't want to know any of that, I guess go watch the movie first. I don't think it really matters, but this is your alert. This is your warning.
That was it.
Yeah.
All right. So, Moonage Daydream was directed by Brett Morgan. It stars David Bowie. The IMDb synopsis says, a cinematic odyssey exploring David Bowie's creative and musical journey from visionary filmmaker Brett Morgan and sanctioned by the Bowie estate.
Oh, cool. I didn't even read the synopsis whenever I copied and pasted it into the show notes, but so I missed the sanction by the Bowie estate, but it makes sense.
Yeah. So I chose this, right? And it won. So I guess I'll kick off from there. Does that sound good?
Yeah, sounds beautiful.
Okay. So, I am and have always been, well, at least from like age 20 onward, I've always been a David Bowie fan. I always kind of wanted to see this movie, but at the same time, it came out during a time whenever there was a lot of like Oscar type movies coming out, and I was catching up on stuff, or at least that's the way I remember it. So I never really watched it, but this was a good opportunity to kind of remedy that. The movie itself is pretty interesting, I think. It doesn't feel like a documentary. Like when I say like this is a David Bowie documentary, I think you would probably think of like talking heads, people who knew him, telling stories, chronicling his life, kind of. That is not really what this movie is. I don't know that I've seen a lot of biographies or music biographies quite like this one. This seems less interested in the history and more interested in sort of his creative journey through his career, through his life, using a lot of interviews and clips from all over the place to kind of piece together what he was thinking early in his career, how he approached art, and then through the later part of his career, and kind of how that went up and down and so on. I think this movie is like edited immaculately, if that makes sense. It's never ending. It's like a constant montage, or I don't know what you call it, but it's
I'd call
a
it
bombardment of sound and vision, to make a David Bowie reference. I think you can easily tell, though, that it feels like something sanctioned by the Bowie estate.
Right.
I don't think there's very much criticism leveled at David Bowie in this.
Right.
And that's fine, right? But it feels pretty squeaky clean in that regard. It doesn't really dive into his drug use or whatever, and I think it would maybe have a little more teeth if it did. But that aside, as like a David Bowie fan of many, 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 many years, I did have a really great time with this. It was everything a David Bowie fan could want, I would think. It's just like 2 hours and 15 minutes of like constant music playing, or him kind of waxing poetic about his artistic philosophies, and then, bookended with more music. So it's just constantly moving and going and has really cool live performances and rare footage. So I would recommend this to any David Bowie fan, but I don't know that I would recommend it if you're looking for a real gritty kind of learn more about David Bowie kind of thing, if that makes sense. So yeah, that's kind of where I land. What?
I said it makes sense to me. It makes complete, perfect sense.
Yeah. So kick it off. What do you think?
Well, I am a lesser David Bowie fan than you. I'd say I'm a fan. I like a lot of his music. I've listened to it. A lot of it I discovered through you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you. And of course, I've seen several of the movies that he's in, but I don't really know much about him. I don't know his discography from a historical perspective, or like a chronological perspective. I don't really know how they tie in together. I have no real idea of his progression. I don't even know which albums are his, first albums versus which ones were his midlife. I'm kind of aware of like Black Star, or is it Lazarus?
That's the last one.
Yeah, I know that's the last one. So outside of that, I don't know much about Bowie. And to your point, this is very much a celebration of Bowie, in my opinion.
Very much.
More than anything else, it's not. Like you said, there's no grit. It's not a criticism. It's
he levels a little bit of criticism at himself, but the movie's not interested in adding on to that or commenting on it.
Right, and I think when it does have that, him talking about himself and criticizing his own process or whatever, I think that's used as an insight into where he was at the time that he was doing X, Y, and Z and making such and such album or appearing in certain movies. So it's a celebration, and it's just a glimpse into what he was thinking at different periods of his life. And I think if you're familiar with that chronology, you'll probably get a lot more out of it than I did, because I don't think I learned very much, because I wasn't always sure where we were musically. Like I can kind of get the idea when they're showing, concert footage is kind of our backbone, and then we're, montaging other random stuff in. I kind of get the idea, like, okay, this is probably a song and a performance from this time. I can kind of follow it, but I think I would get more out of it if I had the real knowledge of his history and his career, which I don't have. And I'm fine with that, honestly, because I think the experience is very cool. I would compare this to something like Man with a Movie Camera. Yeah. I don't know if you ever watched that.
I have.
Yeah. So that's basically like an hour-long editing experiment that's a bit narrativeless. That's not a word, but whatever. Narrative sparse. And this is the same way. There's a lot of moments feel like that. They use a lot of clips from silent films and old classic films, Criterion movies.
Yeah, it was wild every now and then just seeing like a random like public domain, I assume, clip of silent films pop up.
This here's some Metropolis and some. I think there's maybe a Buster. I know there's an image of Buster Keaton.
Yeah, there's a few things that I recognized at the time and then I don't remember now. But
yeah, Unchi and Andalou's there. I think that's a bit more towards the end.
Yeah,
and I'm probably butchering that pronunciation, but there's it kind of reminded me a mix of a concert film mixed with Terrence Malick, particularly Tree of Life, and Man with a Movie Camera, or like a more modern example would be that end bit in Babylon when he's watching Singing in the Rain, and we go through like that montage of visual effects and film history.
Mm-hmm.
And the vibe was very cool. Like I almost wish that, I could take something a little mind altering, like give a Delta gummy or something, or get a little high, get a little stoned or something, which I did not do. I was not prepared for this to be that kind of movie, or maybe,
Yeah.
it's possible I could have. I think it'd be great because it's colorful. It's constantly moving. Even sometimes when David Bowie songs are playing, you're getting sort of a spliced up weird mixed version, or there's also a clashing piano track that's makes a sort of cacophony of sound sometimes, and you're using a lot of exclusively historical interviews with him. There are no interviews shot for this movie of people talking about.
That is something I did not expect at all.
Yeah, me neither. And I love it. I think there's been a trend that I've noticed in documentaries leaning less or experimenting with the zero talking head interviews type thing.
Okay.
At least I've noted over the last 5 years or so. Kind of starting with Peter Jackson's World War I movie, When They Grow Old, or is that what that's called?
They Shall Never Grow Old.
They Shall Never Grow Old. Yeah. Well, that one had the interview audio, but you never saw the talking head image, like the video. And I think it was because it was a lot of historical and they didn't actually shoot very much. But I've seen a few other documentaries that are very sparse, if any, on the talking head idea. And
that's interesting. It works for this because it feels like a lot of Bowie on Bowie, kind of like.
Yeah. What
Bowie
narration
kind of pontificating about himself and his artistic process.
Yeah. And so I learned a lot about that. And I kind of think that's fascinating to hear about the creative process and the doubts and the journey that we go on. Sure, it's David Bowie, but I think it's also a very human journey. I noticed a lot of beats in myself about what art or anything that I create, or even the art that I consume and where my preferences lie. I think I don't know that it's universal, but it's one of those things that felt universal because it spoke to me so much. I've been through some of those same beats that he goes through, and so to me that was very interesting and moving in that way, regardless of my connection with Bowie himself or my knowledge of his history. So it works without knowing that. I think it's just very vague and not very specific. If you don't know that stuff.
Yeah. I think it's always interesting whenever, at least for me, it's always very interesting whenever you see a creative person, whatever kind of creative person they are, whether they're a painter or a musician or an actor or whatever, right?
Or all of it,
it's interesting to see a creative person sort of explain how they approach things, what they're looking to get out of their art at that time, because that can evolve over the course of your lifetime. Mm-hmm. And this movie, I think, does follow a very rough chronology, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think you have clips from all over of different ages of Bowie, but mainly the footage starts out with younger Bowie and kind of moves through his career to different points. And then it'll always cut back to the beginning, or a shot from later in his life will be kind of cut into the beginning of it. And you'll see mixes of footage, but most of the time we're going in chronological order, I think. Hitting sort of the highlights of his career that people would know. And I think it's interesting to see sort of what he was looking at the beginning, the way he approached making an album, the kind of ego that he approached it with. He wanted to appear to Bob Dylan. He wanted to have confounding lyrics that people would scratch their heads over and analyze, And then, you'll see a different part of his career later where he's now I'm in a place where it was pretty dark for the past couple years. I just want to make happy music. And I'm really happy just being an entertainer. And then like 10 minutes later, he's at a different point in his life and he's like, I have been creatively stagnant for 4 years and it's been terrible. And it's like, okay, no more happy music. Now he's going to go with something else, and it's like, it's interesting to see like what any given time, what he needs creatively to keep going and what he's interested in approaching at that period in his life, like the stuff that he was making in the early 80s with Modern Love. That's not the space oddity, David Bowie. That's not the sound and vision, David Bowie, Mm-hmm. They need different things from their creative output in different points in the life. So I think that's really interesting that the musician who's like 25 is not the same as the musician who's 40. They're the same guy, but you change so much through the course of a lifetime that I think it's interesting to see in a relatively short order his progression through the years and how he matured, how he didn't. How he reverted back to some ways, how he didn't. All of that, I think, was really cool in this movie. And it's kind of tackled in a way that I don't know that a lot of musical biopics do, because most of the time it's just let's go in chronological order and talk to a bunch of people who were there. Here's what happened. Here's his childhood, so on. And I think whenever you just focus on the art itself, it feels very personal. Like, I don't know that any more about David Bowie as a man, like what he did, but I do understand him more as an artist, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that's to me what the movie is trying to do and where it shines, Like I don't know any more about his history necessarily. I just know his philosophies and what it's like, what he was like when he was creating stuff and where he was at. Like, I found that interesting too, like talking about the different things that he would do when he felt stagnant. He would put himself in an uncomfortable place in order to, jog his brain into thinking differently.
That was really interesting when he was talking about how any creative person or any person in general should always try to put themselves in a place where it feels like you're wading into the water and it feels like you just get to the point where your feet no longer touch.
Yeah.
And that's whenever you have the potential for something great or something to surprise yourself.
Yeah. But comfort is the enemy of creativity.
Yeah. That was really interesting. Like I said, that's where the movie, I think, really comes alive for me, is just watching a creative person's mind work. And trying to hold on to that creativity as he gets older, because that's a hard thing to do for most people. I think most people lose it, Yeah.
It takes energy, right?
It takes energy and it takes caring for it, right? You gotta care for it or it'll go away. Sure.
But just like, he moves around a lot, right? Like he hates Los Angeles, so he goes and spends years in Los Angeles, right?
Right.
To make his feet not touch the ground, touch the bottom of the ocean or whatever.
Yeah, whatever the metaphor was.
Yeah. And eventually he moves to, I believe was it West Berlin or East Berlin? One of the two. And then at one point he's living in Asia somewhere. I can't remember where. But as you get older, you're less capable of doing that, just from an energy perspective, I think. And I think it's funny, just as he gets older, you have these scenes early on when he's like really anti-marriage or love and relationship, because he can't dedicate that much of his self to something
he's like,
else.
It's got to stay out of my way.
Yeah, it's going to get in the way of his process and his art. And then as he gets older, they don't dive into this as like a flaw.
Yeah.
But I think it's either between the lines, or I think it's just maybe something inherent that it's getting older and suddenly you don't have that relationship. You don't have that person.
Yeah.
sharing your life with them and everything. Like, and I think there is a sort of inevitable longing for that for most people, not everybody, but I found that interesting.
Yeah. Like his philosophy where he was talking about, like, I think at the time he said he was like 40 and he'd never thought about buying a house or something.
Mm-hmm.
Because he just didn't want to, like plant down. Right. And then, yeah, as he gets older, you see his approach to life being different. It becomes a lot more like, well, I don't know that he was ever depressed, but he always said he loved life.
Mm-hmm.
But I think as you get older, you definitely, or as he gets older, or as anyone gets older, there's definitely a changing. And I think you see that through his attire. And he even goes through that part of the movie, right, where he says that at a certain point, he just starts dressing like himself on stage versus dressing like a character or putting on a new character to hide from everyone. Everything, all the theatrics at the beginning of his career, later in his career, he kind of racks up to hiding from the audience or making it to where he felt like he could see them, but they couldn't see him. Not really.
Yeah. And I think that ties in with, there's a clip where he's being interviewed about his painting and he doesn't want to let his paintings be shown. He's like offered art shows and turns them down or accepts and then backs out.
Right.
I think those are kind of two in the same thing, right? Like this sort of barrier, not wanting to fully expose yourself to everybody. And it is interesting. It is interesting, like looking back on those Ziggy Stardust days and that sort of thing, while he, or with the idea in your head that you get later in the movie of him hiding. Like, I would like to go back someday and finish this.
Yeah. And it makes you kind of want to, I don't know, like, I always, like, while watching this, because they're so starkly different, young Bowie versus middle-aged Bowie, it makes you wonder, like, if those two could talk to each other. Like, it almost, like, I know it's like a movie and it's all documentary footage and that's obviously impossible and everything like that, but he feels so alive in this and so young, and the footage looks so good and sharp and, like, remastered, and, like, that, you know, you really, like, see him as a man in a way that, like, I really haven't, because, you know, I was born in, like, the late 80s, right? So
yeah, same.
David Bowie was already, like, an icon, and I haven't really seen a lot of old footage. I just know the music, you know?
Right.
So to see a lot of these interviews sort of just, I don't know, sort of breathe life into a guy that always felt larger than life.
Yeah, and he's intentionally a bit enigmatic
Yeah.
for a lot of his career too, right?
Right. So, I don't know. It's just interesting to see the evolution into something that I don't want to say, like, I don't want to say he was never mature, but it just feels like a progression.
Yeah.
While always staying true. Like there's an energy difference in old Bowie performing Space Oddity versus young Bowie. Like, whenever it kind of cuts the footage where he's on stage with the guitar, you know, and then for just a minute during, like, the doot part, it, like, cuts to, like, an old footage where he's dressed with, like, the red hair and, like, the jumpsuit, and he's, like, kicking on stage, and the energy is very different. But I wouldn't call one of those performances dramatically better than the other either. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's like he was still able to capture what made his song so good and what made him so good and appealing to everybody, while, like, as he put it, being himself and not feeling the need to put on a character anymore. And I don't think it's like whenever Bob Dylan went from, like, folk to electric guitar, and then the fans, like, freaked out and thought, you know, he did something terrible. I don't know that anyone was like, I miss the weird Bowie, you know, like, I miss the Bowie, like, that was cool. You know, you got over a decade of that.
Yeah.
But
I'm sure some people.
yeah, I'm sure. But his career lasted, right? I don't think anyone like. There's no weird down period that I hear about where everyone's like, that era sucked.
Yeah, and I'm always fascinated by, you know, who we are makes like the art that we are, and that our art when we make it is important to us,
right?
And that will always change. But I like that as a time capsule of who we were at the time, you know.
Yeah.
I can see it in my stuff, right, and other people's stuff, and obviously it's one of the like main themes and stuff on display here.
Yeah, and there's even the idea that he said that I never even put this together, and it'd be interesting to go back and listen to the albums with this in mind. But basically, when he was talking about how he tries to like encapsulate a year, like the year he's making the album, he tries to sort of get that represented in the music. So in the body of work, he's trying to get like 1975 as it's happening, you know, or whatever.
Yeah.
And that's an interesting way to, I think, approach it.
Yeah. It's not something I'd considered when listening to his music.
Yeah, exactly. Like when it's all available to me now, I'm not putting myself, not that I could even if I wanted to, but I'm not trying to put myself in like, what was it like in 1969? You know, I could never do that, and it doesn't make sense, but it's interesting to see him contextualize his career that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I don't know. I don't have a whole lot else to say about this movie because it's hard to really dive into, other than just to reiterate my criticism at the beginning. It definitely feels like a movie that was sanctioned by the Bowie estate.
Mm-hmm.
I would have liked a little bit more flaws because we've all got them. And we all, I think, could Google David Bowie and find more out about his flaws. But I don't know. I would have liked maybe a little bit more context in there. But again, I do acknowledge that that's not what this documentary was even trying to do.
Yeah, for sure. And the flaws that are there, as I said before, just kind of, they seem to serve as justification for the art that he goes on to create. And they're pretty minor as well. Like the stuff we've talked about of him saying, I was trying to hide myself. It's like, it's not quite a criticism, but that's about as deep as the criticism of himself goes.
That's the kind of criticism that like matters to oneself, but doesn't really, it's not really pointing out a flaw of like something you did that was bad or a different side that like maybe you got to be like, well, we got to take the good with the bad, you know, like there's none of that in here. It's all just pretty much good.
Yeah. And I think the only other thing I think I have to say is that in some ways I'm glad I've seen less David Bowie movies than I have, because there were definitely times when I wasn't sure if we were seeing experimental film or someone following him around with a camera, or if we were seeing a movie.
I imagine if you have not seen The Man Who Fell to Earth and you watched this documentary, you'd be like, what the hell does this footage even exist in?
Yeah. Why is there footage of him doing these things?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why is he pulling his eye out? Who's this girl?
Yeah. And
why is he stirring a cup with a gun?
Yeah. So those are the points where I was, I don't want to say taken out of the vibe, but like I was well aware of what it was. And that footage, I think it would be an interesting thing to watch this movie and have that footage be that sort of mysterious that you're talking about, you know.
Yeah.
For better or worse, it would be interesting because there were definitely, you know, footage of him when he's walking on his escalators with the lights and all the reflections, or
he's like walking through Japan or something.
Yeah, I'm like, is this from a movie, or is like, why?
I know
this,
that was pretty cool footage though.
It was very cool, and I think it adds to the enigma of him as well, to just not really understand if am I seeing footage from a music video, or is this stuff he shot in his own? Is this some of his experimental art?
Where am I?
Is this,
when am I?
Is this a movie? I don't know. Whatever.
Yeah. Where did this come from?
Yeah.
Well, and some of it's like brand new footage never seen before. But the thing is, like, I'm not really like a a guy that's like dived into a lot of like archive footage of artists, you know? So like, I don't know. It's all new footage to me, except for the movies that I've seen.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
I haven't even seen a lot of this. I'd say 100% of this concert footage I've never seen before.
Yeah. And so like, yeah, it was cool. Like, and it adds to the overall mood piece of this thing. And like, if nothing else, this is one big mood piece, this movie.
Yeah. It's absolutely that. And it works. I mean, if you don't like David Bowie, you're not going to like it.
No, I can't imagine having a very good time.
But I do.
And
I like find his music interesting. And even if it's not something I seek out to listen to on my own, like just when I'm driving in the car, this is a great way to listen to some of his music, because it gives you a lot more than just listening, and a good reason to get through some of it, because his music isn't stuff that I can just listen to for the most part. He has a lot of music. There's a handful of maybe I would say 10 to 15 songs that I could really just jam.
Yeah.
And he has way more than that I can't really.
Absolutely.
And I heard a lot of that in this.
Yeah.
So
I even
nice.
found a couple songs in here that I was like, ooh. And I had to add it to a playlist, so I was jamming out on some Bowie earlier today.
Yeah, I did too. I did too earlier. Had to. Had some songs stick in my head, some songs that I was waiting to hear that didn't show up as well. So
yeah, and while we're just waxing on about David Bowie, about how awesome he is, one thing I've always appreciated about David Bowie is the varying styles of singing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, sometimes his voice can be really deep, and sometimes his voice can be really high. And then sometimes he can sing one way, and then he can sing another way. And it's like, he could sound different in a way that a lot of singers I don't think do.
Yeah. Huge range. And that's something that I like. And I mean, sometimes to me, that's the difference between a song I like and I don't, you know?
Yeah.
Sometimes the song will go and he'll start saying like, this vibe isn't really working for me.
This era of Bowie, not for me.
Yeah. Or not for today, you know, sometimes.
Yeah. Not in the mood.
You know? So for better or worse, I totally agree with you. Probably for better, honestly. I mean, you know.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
so does that wrap up our discussion of Moonage Daydream?
Yes, it does.
Rock on.
I think it's ultimately a recommend from both of us, right?
Yeah. I would say if you're a David Bowie fan, strong recommend. If you're not a David Bowie fan, I probably don't recommend it, but I do anyway because you should be.
Maybe this will make you one.
Yeah, maybe this will make you a Bowie fan, so watch it.
I think there's definitely potential for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
Okay. Moving on, we can get into our poll and us making our choices for the next poll that's going to be up on our Twitter account, which I don't think I've said it yet, is at casualcinemedia. So go follow us there on Twitter or X. But Mike, do you want to tell the people what the theme is for this poll and the whole little theme thing we're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are doing sort of a backwards countdown by decade of movies in the Criterion Collection. We most recently did the 2020s, because that's the decade we're in now, and the winner of that was the review you just listened to, Moonage Daydream. So next, you guessed it, are the 2010s.
Way to count.
Yep.
Backwards.
Yep. That's the next decade back. So now our goal is to choose a film each for the listeners to vote on, and that will be the subject of our next Casually Criterion episode, which will be our next episode.
Yeah.
Now, we have actually talked about some of the movies released in this decade, obviously, because we've reviewed Criterion films for years. Some of these, though, we actually reviewed at the time, and then they retroactively became Criterion's later.
Yeah.
Which is
Maybe
interesting.
10 or so.
Yeah. So Justin and I were talking about going back and maybe relabeling some of those episodes one day. Not today, but someday.
Yeah. But if your favorite 2010 movie isn't picked as an option and you're like, how could you not pick
Yeah. How come
Parasite,
you didn't pick, yeah, exactly. Why
It's
didn't you
because
pick
we already-
Minding the Gap? Well, that's because we've already reviewed that one.
Yeah. Well, that one we reviewed when it was on Criterion.
That's
but,
true. Damn it. That was the
Parasite
wrong
we
example.
reviewed.
Why didn't they
Parasite,
pick The Irishman?
Yeah. Those we reviewed when they came out upon release, so you can go back to those. So there's still a lot of well-known 2010 Criterion films that we haven't reviewed, though. So
Yep.
I think I went first last time, Mike, so I'm going to toss to you to
Oh,
to make the
no.
pick
You're
first.
doing that already? Okay.
I know.
All right. So there's a lot of movies here that okay. So full disclosure, I'm not going to do this, but I teased Justin with it earlier. I was going to pick Boyhood because I don't think Justin dislikes the movie, but he's seen it twice, I believe, and
Yes.
doesn't love it. And here's the thing. I don't know that I love it, but I admire the heck out of it. And I think it's a very good movie, and I've seen it 3 times, I think, and each time it does get better. So
Sure.
I do think there's value to be had, but I'm not going to pick Boyhood, even though I think it would be funny to make Justin watch that. I was also going to pick Rolling Thunder Review, a Bob Dylan story by Martin Scorsese. But
Wow.
I know, I figured that would be a little bit of overkill on the music biography stuff.
Yeah. Take
So I
it easy
won't.
over there.
So, all right, fine. I will choose. Okay, I'm going to choose a movie that I've wanted to see for a while, directed by someone whose films I have never seen, or like as far as directed by, but I have seen him act in a few things. And that film is Wildlife, directed by Paul Dano.
Yes. Okay. Interesting choice. I was trying to figure it out as you were talking.
I know, I was
tend
trying
do
to
it.
tease you and stretch it out.
I was so teased. I did not know what it was until you said the name.
Yeah, I've heard good things about Wildlife. I've always kind of wanted to see if it lived up to that height. I'm always rooting for Paul Dano. I like that guy.
Yeah, he makes interesting choices and seems like a guy that carefully chooses what he does and always seems to have I can see the reason why roles and things would appeal to him.
Yeah. And he also, every time I hear him interviewed, he just seems like a cool guy. He just seems like a guy that I would want to hang out with and have him talk about movies because he seems like he really loves it. Loves them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so
Good choice.
Wildlife, directed by Paul Dano, is my pick. Justin, what is yours? And why is it Tree of Life?
I thought about that, but it always loses, and that's why it's not going to be a Tree of Life. Plus, Chris is the one of the three of us who hasn't seen Tree of Life, so I want to save that for a time when he's back on
When
the
you
show.
can make him watch it.
Yeah. That's the ultimate goal of this: is to make each other watch movies we don't like
Okay.
or have never seen.
I want to change mine to
But
Boyhood.
anyways, I know. I was gonna pick Portrait of a Lady on Fire because we only briefly talked about it on the News on the March, and I think it made some of our best of the year that it came out.
Yeah, it's a banger.
But I wanted to actually go back and choose a movie we haven't talked about on the show at all, and a movie I've been like super close to rewatching several times over the last few months, and I just haven't gotten there yet. It's a film by the Coen brothers, one that I really love. It's one of my favorites of theirs. And actually, I saw a clip on TikTok like 2 days ago of Oscar Isaac in a ska band in his like pre-famous days, playing guitar and singing, and it was very cool. So I think it's serendipitous that this film is one of the 2010 movies we could choose from. It's Inside Llewyn Davis from the Coen brothers.
Another Carey Mulligan joint.
Yes. What is that? Is Wildlife Carey Mulligan?
Well, yeah, I was thinking, I think so. Now that I've said that, I'm doubting myself.
Yeah,
But
I don't know.
It doesn't
No.
matter.
It doesn't matter. We talked about Maestro briefly or something.
Yeah, I'll just go with that. That's what I meant. All those Carey
Anyways.
Mulligan movies we watch.
Oh, yes, she is in it.
Okay, that's what I thought.
You're correct. Okay, yeah. So Carey Mulligan week next time, regardless of what happens.
Yeah, we won't be pulling any mulligans. We're going to go with whatever wins.
Wow.
That's a thing, right? Mulligan?
That's a joke. Yeah. It's like a do-over.
Yeah, that's right.
Or yeah. So you nailed it. But I'm pumped about either one of these winning.
Yeah, absolutely.
Go to our Twitter /X account. Again, that's at Casual Cinecast. That link will be in the show notes as well if you want to just go directly there. But follow us there. Vote in all our polls. Help choose the next one. And I think with that, we are done with this episode, right, Mike?
We are. Stay tuned, like, subscribe to this channel, all that stuff. Our next episode will be whatever wins that poll. So,
yeah. Plus, will we have the Bad Batch by then? Will we be done with Bad Batch?
If we watch the finale before we record that Wednesday.
Okay.
Or if we record Thursday, then yes.
Okay.
We'll see.
If so, it'll be a big Bad Batch talk, too.
Probably so.
All right. Well, thank you, listeners, so much for listening. As always, thanks Jake Wagner-Russell for doing our intro and outro music. If you want to hear more of his music, go to soundcloud.com/bopscotch. And with that, Mike, we'll talk to you next time.
All right. Talk to you next time. I'm going to go finish Shogun. Last episode.
Humble brag. I haven't even watched the first yet, and I'm way behind on it.
Yeah, it's good. I'm excited.
I'll get there.
All right.
And we'll probably talk about it.
Probably. Hopefully. Anyway. Bye.
Bye.